effect. And we have a number of presenters, as you can see, who will be coming from the Interfaith Worker Justice organization in town. There are also a number of people speaking out of the different faith traditions, some of the different faith traditions that we represent here in Arizona Interfaith Movement. We're going to move right along because of time constraints today. We have a number of very interesting people, so that means we've got to stay with our agenda. And the first person is Christina Sanadad. She works with, I'm sorry, excuse me. This is Dr. Larry Bell, who's standing here at the front of the group, and he is the director of the Cutler Plotkin Center. And he is our host for the day, and at the very top of my paper, it says
as he said, my name is Dr. Lawrence Bell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Arizona Jewish Historical Society, and this is our center, the Cutler Plotkin Jewish Heritage Center, and I thought that since probably most of you have never been here before, I wouldn't mind saying a word or two about where you're at, because I think that this is a very appropriate place to have an interfaith forum. This building that you're sitting in was the very first synagogue that was constructed in Phoenix. It was originally built in 1921 and was the original home of Temple Beth Israel. In 1949, the building was sold to the Southern Baptist Convention, and it began a new life as a Chinese-speaking Baptist church. In 1981, the building was transferred again within the Baptist church, this time to a Spanish-speaking congregation, and so it has been home to a Jewish congregation, a Chinese-speaking Christian congregation, and a Spanish-speaking Christian congregation. And so if you're having a forum on interfaith dialogue, I can't think of a better place to do that. Our group purchased the facility in 2001. It was a dilapidated old church by then, and was actually in danger of being torn down by a developer because, as you know, in Phoenix, if you've lived here a while, we tend to make parking lots out of everything. And so we rescued this building and really have gone through an 8-year painstaking process to restore it very much to its original condition. And so there's a photo on the wall all the way on this side to the right of a Passover Seder that was held in this building in 1926. And so at some point today, before you leave, take a quick look at that picture and do a little comparison, and you'll see that we've really done a restoration of this place. Basically, this is no longer necessarily a functioning synagogue. We're restored it to become a museum, a learning center, an education center, and a place for dialogue between different kinds of people. And so we are very, very honored to host you all as our guests today here at the center, and we hope to see you as we go forward many more times. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bell. We are delighted to be here and certainly grateful for your hospitality. Our first presentation will be by Christina Sanadad. She is Director of Operations for the Worker Rights Center. And she did her master's degree at ASU, where she documented the socio-political climate in Maricopa County over the last decade and its effects on the state of labor for immigrant workers, as well as the effects of wage theft on workers and their communities. So would you welcome Ms. Sanadad?
Good morning, thanks for being here. It's an honor to be here with you and to engage in this interfaith dialogue on wage theft. I wanted to start off with a brief overview of the history of the Worker Rights Center, the work that we're doing, and to talk about wage theft, because wage theft is not a very commonly used term, so we should know what we're talking about here. The Arizona Interfaith Alliance for Worker Justice was a project of our national network, Interfaith Worker Justice, and was formed here locally in Arizona by the Reverend Trina Zelli in 2006. And initially it served as a faith labor alliance, connecting, resourcing, educating, and mobilizing the faith community to support labor struggles, labor labor activities. And in 2008, in response to the expressed needs of workers, Reverend Trina Zelli organized and formed the Worker Rights Center right here, actually a block away, in 2008. And we started off as a very service-based organization, working with individuals who had experienced different violations in the workplace. We helped them, we educated them about their rights in the workplace. We helped them document the abuses, file complaints with government agencies, with the courts. But we were seeing that the same workers were coming in over and over again with new cases from different companies, and then the same workers from the same companies were coming back. And so in 2010, after the passage of SB 1070, we refocused our work to do more organizing, campaign work, to really focus on educating, empowering, developing leaders in the community. And that's the current focus of our work right now. We're continuously striving to be a worker-led, community-based organization, and our members are primarily low-income Latino immigrants who work in low-wage industries such as landscaping, cleaning, and construction. Are you guys able to see the screen? So we, over the last several years, since August of 2008 when we opened as a Worker Rights Center, we've documented over 270 cases of abuse in the workplace, which involved over 500 workers. And their complaints tend to fall into one of five categories. The first is health and safety violations. So typically when a worker is denied safety equipment, safety training, information about risks in the workplace. The second category is workers' compensation. So they're either actively denied workers' compensation after an accident in the workplace, or they don't know how to file a complaint and were never assisted by a doctor when they went to seek assistance. The third type of complaint is discrimination. We primarily see race and language-based discrimination cases. The fourth kind of complaint has to do with unemployment, specifically unemployment fraud, when employers provide fraudulent paperwork to deny workers unemployment insurance. But also, again, there are people that just don't know how to initiate that process, and so we're able to serve them in that way. And about 75–80% of our cases are wage theft cases. And what wage theft refers to is the denial of legally mandated wage. So that can be the denial of minimum wage, of overtime, having wages illegally deducted from your paycheck, or not being paid at all for hours that you've worked. And in the 270 cases that we've had, individual debts, or debts that the employers have, wage debts, have ranged from $60, so a day's worth of pay, to about $200,000. And those are cases in which the worker is owed minimum wage and overtime. And Jose, actually a member of the center, is going to be sharing his testimony, and he's owed $162,000 over the last 2 years in minimum wage and overtime pay. So in the time that we've been documenting these abuses, what we've seen is a culture of underreporting of violations and abuses in the workplace. And we attribute this most to the vulnerability of immigrant workers, who, because of English language proficiency, access to the labor market, fear because of status, they're more vulnerable in the workplace and less willing to confront their employers for fear of retaliation, job loss. But a second thing that we attribute this lack of reporting to is the recession, because there are very few jobs and a lot of competition for these jobs. And so to complain is to risk having a livelihood for your family. And so we're seeing very few people report. And among those who do report, there are also some very consistent trends. The majority of people only come in once they have been denied one or several full paychecks. less likely to report ongoing violations or to come in specifically to report ongoing violations such as minimum wage or overtime, and very infrequently will report minor violations of the rights in the workplace. Another trend that we're seeing is that they will not report until there's very little risk. So they'll report once they've already been let go from a job, or once they're already being denied pay because losing their job won't mean as much or won't be as risky. And finally, workers are choosing they're choosing quick, easy, cost-effective, mostly free methods of recourse for recuperating the monies owed, and most often this is filing complaints with the Department of Labor. However, this has very important consequences because the Department of Labor does no investigation into the claims. They don't interview other workers or try to engage with the employers to correct the violations. At best, workers are paid what they individually are owed, but nothing is done to stop these violations from reoccurring in the same workplace. And so this culture of underreporting has a severe consequence for the state of labor, which is deteriorating in Phoenix and across the nation. I think it's very clear and to say that wage theft is both rampant and systematic. The University of Chicago estimates that frontline workers in low-wage industries in the 3 largest cities in the nation, Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City, lose more than $56.4 million per week as a result of employment and labor law violations. And Phoenix, I think it's important to note, is the 6th largest city in the United States. So we could be seeing very similar numbers here in Phoenix. And so this is one thing that our Worker Rights Center is working towards now. We intend to approach the City Council to ask that they recognize and fund a wage theft task force, which would investigate the scope of the problem here in Phoenix. Because of the very few cases that we've seen, we've been able to document very severe emotional, financial, physical health-related consequences, and this is an issue that we really need to address as a society, as a community. I think it's also important to note that the majority of the cases we see, the majority of wage theft cases, are not instances of employers not knowing their legal obligations or just mismanaging their funds. There is a criminal intent to deny people their wages. And scholars nationwide are documenting 4 major strategies, 2 of which are the most common at the Worker Rights Center. The first is called the evasion strategy, and it's a scheme in which the employer creates legal distance between themselves and the workers by misclassifying them as independent contractors. As independent contractors, workers do not have access to or the right to minimum wage, overtime, workers' compensation, unemployment, and so by creating that legal distance, they're able to cut their overhead costs and increase their own profits. And the second violation, or the second strategy or scheme that we're seeing is a violation strategy, which simply refers to an employer outright disregarding labor and employment law. So for example, people who are not paid for all hours worked, or they're asked to clock out and not paid for those hours. That's an example of a violation strategy. And in our work at the center, we've been able to document emotional health and symptoms of trauma as a result of wage theft. We've been able to document a deterioration of physical health, which I think Jose will also speak to in his testimony. And we've also seen a very important impact on the financial well-being of families. Recently, about less than a month ago, the poverty statistics came out for Phoenix, and it shows that 1 in 6 of Phoenix metro area residents lives below the poverty line, and 40.2% of adults living below the poverty line have a full-time or part-time job. And while I believe part of that can be attributed minimum standards that are too low to support a family. I believe that another percentage can be attributed to employers who are simply not paying their workers. And so what does this mean for us as people of faith? At the Worker Rights Center, when we do outreach to faith communities, what we ask of communities is that they support us with their time, their talent, and their treasure. I mentioned that we're starting an anti-wage theft campaign, and there are several short and long-term goals that we can use your assistance with. And the first is the wage theft task force that I referred to and I spoke about earlier. But also, we are going to try to change legislation on a city and statewide level, both to strengthen the labor protections, increase collection efforts, and increase the labor law enforcement, so that workers are better able to secure their rights and access recourse. And I don't want to go over time, so I'm going to go ahead and pass on to Tex, who will introduce Jose.
We will now have testimony by a working person who has experienced wage theft. Jose Reyes is an immigrant from Honduras. He's been in the United States since 1993, coming here to escape the violence of the Civil War in his own country and to seek employment here. He is a member of the Workers' Rights Center since September of this year. He's estimated to be owed $162,000 in wages over the last 2 years alone. His comments will be translated by Mariana Del Hierro.
Mi nombre es, primero que Dios les bendiga a todos. Mi nombre es José Roberto Reyes. Vine aquí a los Estados Unidos en el año 1993, pues refugiándome de la violencia civil.
First of all, God bless everyone. My name is Jose, and I came here. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Sorry. First of all, God bless everyone. My name is Jose, and I came here to the United States fleeing from civil unrest.
Siempre pues llegué buscando trabajo aquí en los Estados Unidos. Pues anteriormente yo vendía también de uno que ponen para sacar el.
And then I arrived to the United States always in search for a job, and I started off selling handkerchiefs on the street.
Y el 11 de febrero del año 2000 encontré a un señor que me ofreció trabajo.
And on February 11th of 2000, I found a man who offered me work.
Luego me llevó a él a su compañía y me dijo que hiciera tal trabajo.
And then he took me back to where his company was located and he offered me work.
Pero me dijo que hiciera un trabajo de velador en la noche, trabajando de 6 de la tarde a 6 de la mañana.
And so he offered me to be a night watchman at this company, working from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Pagándome una cantidad de $240 por 7 días, 7 noches.
And so he paid me $240 for 7 nights of work.
Resulta que como los años me van avanzando y pues yo ya me miro muy viejito ya.
And so as the years went on, my employer decided that I was now a little too old to be working.
Y el 31 de agosto, a las 6 de la tarde, llegué a mis labores siempre, pero ya él me cerró al inspector y me dijo que ya no iba a trabajar.
And so on August 31st at 6 p.m., to start my day, he told me that I was no longer needed to work.
Entonces no le dije nada de él, pero acudí a la embajada de Honduras a dar mi reportaje, ¿verdad? Porque me habían sacado.
And so at that moment, I didn't tell him anything, but I went straight to the Honduran consulate to report to them what had happened to me.
Y de ahí me enviaron adentro de derechos laborales de esta Cristina.
And so that's where they sent me to the Worker Rights Center, and I started working with Christina.
Entonces ella me dijo que me iban a ayudar y pues di todo mi testimonio ahí, pues me pusieron un abogado y gracias a Dios ahorita el abogado, pues estamos haciendo la lucha, pues me está peleando una cantidad de $162,000.
And so I arrived at the center and I told them my story, and thankfully they were able to find a lawyer that helped me, and we realized that I owed $162,000 of wages.
Yo tengo la fe en Dios que todo va a salir bien.
And so I have faith in God that everything's going to turn out right. So now we're just going to go to the question and answer session with Jose, so we can get a little bit more of the story. So the first question is, describe a typical day at work. What was your schedule and what did you do?
Mi trabajo era de velador en la noche. Mi horario era de entrar a las 6 de la tarde hasta las 6 de la mañana.
So again, he was a night watchman and he worked from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. every day.
Trabajé por 11 años y como él no me pagaba lo que me tenía que pagar, que no me pagaba horas extras, ni días de descanso me daba él. Para la humanidad él no me daba ni un día de descanso.
So during this whole time that I was working for him, I was never paid overtime. I was never given vacation days. I was never given even holidays off.
Pues mis condiciones donde yo trabajaba, él me había dado una paga que viviera ahí mismo donde trabajaba, porque la área donde trabajaba era muy grande, pero él me decía que yo tenía que vivir ahí forzosamente.
And so, as part of my contract, I was also given a trailer in which to live in, because he said that because of the area that I had to work in, it was so large, I had to live there so that I could control.
En la trailer no hay ninguna clase de servicio, solo había un cable de luz, no había baño, donde lavarse las manos no había. Yo para hacer mis cosas, pues yo iba ya a negar o a decir por qué. Por 11 años estuve ahí.
And so in this trailer that I was told to live in, there it wasn't really accommodated for any basic services. The only thing that I had was a cable for electricity, but there wasn't a sink or a bathroom. And if I did need to go for my basic necessities, I had to walk over to the Jack in the Box. And this is what I went through for 11 years.
El robo del sueldo económicamente y financieramente me afectó grandemente, porque yo en Honduras tengo a mi mamá que tiene leucemia y no podía yo comprarle su medicina.
Financially, wage theft affected me a lot more because in Honduras I have my mother who is suffering from leukemia, and I wasn't able to send her the necessary medicine that she needed.
Y la medicina mía tampoco no la podía comprar yo. Y luego, él me decía a mí que no le avisara cuando yo tuviera el pleno, que no le dijera. Y siempre me decía que que yo le iba a salir caro es mandarme para Honduras. Y porque supuestamente lo que quería pues, yo me muriera prácticamente.
And I also couldn't afford my own medicine, and my employer often told me not to even let him know when I was ill, and because it was just going to be too expensive for him, so basically he was just letting me down.
Pues yo ahorita fui al derecho de centro de derechos laborales para ver si me ayudan, pues voy a aplicar ahí. Estoy esperando que me manden algo de dinero para poder solventar mi problema mío.
So I asked him how he's resolving his problem, and he said that he went to the Worker Rights Center and now he's working along with Christina to get his case resolved.
Le hablaron del centro de derechos laborales de ahí, le hablaron a Don Meli y él contestó que yo no había trabajado ahí. Por ejemplo, él no sabía que yo tenía videos grabados de ahí.
And so, for example, the Worker Rights Center, they called my employer to ask him questions about my situation, and he responded that Jose didn't even work there. But luckily for Jose, the employer didn't realize that Jose had videotaped his living conditions and his work conditions too.
Ni sabía tampoco que yo cada cheque que me daba él, yo iba sacando copias.
Nor did he know that every check that he gave me, I would keep copies of them.
Y cuando le hablaron a él, pues él dijo que yo no trabajaba ahí, que ni me conocía.
And so when they called him, he said that he didn't even know who I was.
Entonces Cristina habló con el abogado y automáticamente le mandaron todas las copias.
And so Cristina then contacted a lawyer, and the lawyer automatically sent to my ex-employer all of the copies that I had saved.
Y creo que se asustó cuando la tiró.
And I think he got scared when he saw all of these copies.
Pues lo que yo deseo que me llegue todo de mí, pues los que están afectados, así toda persona que estaba siendo afectada, está bueno que denuncie lo que le está pasando, porque a veces uno por miedo de que le van a quitar el trabajo o que el patrón se va a enojar con uno, viene a saber qué le va a pasar. Y si no tiene papeles, pues tiene miedo que lo deporten. No, hay que denunciar todo lo que le está pasando a uno.
So what I want for everyone to take away from this story is that you need to report any violations that you have in the workplace. Even if you're scared or if you're undocumented, it doesn't matter, you need to report these violations.
A donde yo trabajaba, el patrón me decía que no salía. Y cuando llegaba alguien a platicar conmigo, no estoy platicando con nadie, porque a él no le gustaba que yo platicara con alguien para que no me diera cuenta la gente de lo que me estaba sucediendo.
And so when people would come by, my boss would never allow me to talk to anyone because he didn't want me to share any information with anyone.
Pero le doy gracias a Dios y al centro de aquí, donde está Cristina, que me han despertado malamente. Yo ahora hablo más y no podía ni hablar.
I thank God and Christina and the center that now I'm receiving help, and now I even talk more because before I wouldn't speak as much.
Al otro día me llevaron al abogado que yo tengo y me sentía bien contento yo platicando con él.
The other day I was taken to the lawyer and I was very happy during that visit.
Quiero que se lleven algo de aquí del centro. Sí, que se lleven algo de aquí del centro.
That we want you to take away information from the Worker Rights Center, this presentation. Thank you.
Gracias, Senor Reyes, and thank you very much, Ms. Hierro. Our next presenter is the Reverend Trina Zeller. Reverend Zeller was ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA. She served in a number of locations in ministry. She also founded the Arizona Interfaith Alliance for Worker Justice and served as its executive director between 2006 and 2011. She currently serves the community as a national organizer for the Presbyterian Health, Education, and Welfare Association, a ministry of compassion, peace, and justice ministry, part of the General Assembly Mission Council. Reverend Zeller.
I think better on my feet than sitting down, so I'll just come over here. And it's my understanding that my task today is to talk about wage theft in light of Christian teaching. So I'll try to confine myself to that, but it's hard not to go off on tangents, so I'm counting on you to stop me. Stop me before I take everybody else's time too. Christianity, in terms of its understanding of theft, of course, is we're against it. Our faith is based on the teachings of Jesus, who himself was a Jew and whose own beliefs and teachings were based on the Jewish faith. Beyond the commandment not to steal. My own theory about him is that much of his teaching was really an ongoing conversation with the prophet Isaiah and with the book of Leviticus. And I'm sorry, as somebody who's been an ordained clergy person for 30 years, I find this kind of stuff riveting, and I suspect most of you would not. So I will try to contain myself. But by way of example, in the Holiness Code in Leviticus, you find that the people are instructed to always pay the worker before the sun goes down, and that there is no excuse for not paying a worker, and that always the assumption is that the decision is to go for the worker, not the employer. Jesus kind of expands on this in his parable of the laborer in the vineyard, where there are three people who are working, and the employer, one starts at, let's say, 9 o'clock, the next one starts at noon, and the next one starts at 3, and quitting time is 6. And the owner pays everybody the same amount of money. Well, the person who first worked was incensed, because what are you doing paying these other people who work less time than me the same amount of money? And what he says is basically, don't challenge the generosity of God. That what God is trying to tell God's children is, be generous and be hospitable, and don't withhold that which makes other people's lives bearable. For me, that's what that story tells it. And again, he says that love your neighbor as yourself, and love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And upon all of that hang along the prophets. So that's the Christian understanding from the perspective of this Christian. And then to narrow it down a little bit, I also speak from the perspective of Protestant Christianity. As a Presbyterian, even more specifically, as somebody who's a product of Calvinism. And I tell people my denomination was founded by a French lawyer. That's really all you need to know about us to need to understand why we're a little bit weird with our citing precedent. And some people think we're a little legalistic. And I've never been to a church meeting of any other denomination where hours would be spent on word crafting. Should we say may? Should we say shall? Should we say will? And there are votes on these kinds of things. In any case, As you know, Calvinism is kind of the predecessor of what we call the Protestant work ethic. The notion that we're here to produce, to excel, and that this whole doctrine of predestination somehow says that we know who is scheduled for salvation by how prosperous they are. I'm happy to say that's a severe misreading, if not perversion, of that understanding. And again, I don't want to go off on tangents that everybody else finds, lays your eyes over boring. But I think it's important to understand that what he was really trying to say is that nobody can earn God's grace. It's a gift. Now, he kind of went over the top then and said, in fact, it really doesn't matter what you do. God decided before the creation of the world whether you were saved or not. And so it's irrelevant what you do or what you don't do, which is why Presbyterians have a very bad history of evangelism. It's kind of like, well, what's the point? It was decided before creation. In any case, there's been sort of the idea that, and a lot of people believe this, that if you live well, if you're prosperous, it's because God approves of you, and that you are one of God's elect. That's really not true, either in terms of our belief and certainly my understanding. And if that's all there was, I think you would see Protestantism and Presbyterianism sort of just stuck with, well, things are the way they are, too bad. But that's not the case at all. When you go back and look at the Presbyterian Church and Protestantism in the United States, you see kind of this parallel track of people whose understanding is that we're here to transform society. You have folks who are here to stay sullied by society, and that's where you have folks who live off in their own little communities. And then you have people who think that everything's evil, but they still live in it. And then there are those of us who believe in transformation. And to go on with that a little bit, back in the early 20th century, there was something called the social gospel movement, and Walter Rauschenbusch was probably the progenitor of that. I wish I could claim him, but he was a Baptist. So it shows that people besides Presbyterians come up with good ideas. But what he came up with, and it was an ecumenical statement, was called the 1908 Social Creed. And in that, and I won't read the entire thing to you, but if you're interested in any of these resources, I'll get your name and email you this stuff after this meeting. But this 1908 Social Creed talks about, among other things, the abolition of child labor, the regulation of the conditions of toil for women as shall safeguard the physical and moral health of the community, a living wage in every industry, the most equitable division of the products of industry, suitable provision for old age. And in fact, it anticipates a lot of Roosevelt's New Deal. The social creed and the response to the industrialism and the robber barons, again, is something that we're still fighting that battle today, both in and out of the church, with folks who say that, well, we're here only to show that we can remain pure and untouched, and so other people's situations are their own problem, and probably they deserve it, and then you have the other track that is saying, no, these are things that we're put here on earth to change and to stand in solidarity with each other. And so in terms of Protestant American Christianity, I would say that the Social Creed of 1908 is just one of those things you want to acquaint yourself with, especially if you are of a Christian tradition and you hear from others that we really don't do anything but sit back and allow people to suffer and look to heaven as the final goal. My own denomination, along with a few others, put together a social creed for the 21st century, which we passed at two general assemblies ago, two national assemblies, which say a lot of the same things. And to show the division, even within my own denomination, there are a number of churches who want to leave the denomination because they find such statements unacceptable and somehow contrary to the gospel, which is hard for me to understand, but there you go. The other thing I would like to bring up, I'm not sure how the time's going, 2 minutes. Okay, there's a wonderful document put together by the World Alliance of Reformed Churches, which are all of the Calvinist churches in the world, who come together every 4 years. The Accra Confession was the result of a meeting they had in Accra, Africa, in 2004. And it's pretty radical. It says things like, we believe that God is sovereign over all creation, therefore we reject the current world economic order imposed by global neoliberal capitalism and any other economic system, including absolute planned economies which defy God's covenant by excluding the poor, the vulnerable, and the whole of creation from the fullness of life. This goes on for 3 or 4 pages, and again, it makes me proud to be part of this tradition when I see this. The other side of this tradition is the reason that this document ever had to be written, and what they talk about before they do their confession is recounting how they went to worship one morning in a chapel that was built on top of the fortress that held slaves before their departure to the Middle Passage to the New World. And what they realized as they were worshiping there is that they were literally worshiping on top of the dungeons. And that these good, pious, Dutch Reformed slave traders would go worship every morning before they would ship people off to lives of misery. And the need for repentance and an awareness of what was happening. And that's a challenge to the Christian church today, is to realize that once again, those of us in the New World, the people of privilege, are worshiping on top of the dungeon, where people are suffering and living lives of misery, and it is our call to address that out of our faith. So that's all.
Thank you very much, Reverend Zeller. Our next presentation is by Imam Anas Halel. He was born and raised in Lebanon. Began his career as an electrical engineer and worked in the high-tech industry. Presently, he serves part-time as the Imam at the Islamic Center of Northeast Valley and as the local chapter president of the Council on American Islamic Relations. Welcome, Imam Halel.
Well, I'm very honored to be part of this. This really speaks to my faith. I'm really honored as well to represent the Islamic faith. And briefly, when we talk about any legal matter in Islam, it usually comes from 2 main sources. One is the Quran, which we believe is the revealed Word of God. So we believe it's the actual, literal Word of God. And the other source is the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So it's basically anything he said or did or approved of. And pretty much any legal scholar in Islam would refer to these main sources. Obviously, there are many other sources. For example, logic is another source or resource we rely on. And also all the analogies and so forth. Now, about employment and wages and so forth. First and foremost, to work is an honor in Islam. So any type of work, it doesn't matter how you think low paying it is, for example, is honorable in Islam. In fact, we have a clear statement by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He said that the best type of food you can eat is when you go and work and come back, make some money, and come back and buy food. Meaning that you don't rely on other people. You don't go and beg or ask other people for money. And he also told us, he gave us this comparison between two brothers, blood brothers. One is worshiping God, very pious, but he's not working. He's relying on his other brother who goes out and works the whole day. So that brother who's working hard and providing for his brother, he said, this man is much better than the worshiper. Even though we know when you worship and you dedicate your life to worship God, it's very, very good, very honorable. But the fact that the other brother, working hard and providing not just for himself, but his brother as well, that's even better. Not only that, he told us that there's no such a thing as a lowly job. Every job is honorable. It doesn't matter what you do. He said, even if you have to go out, get a rope, go out in the forest, in the jungle, and get some wood. Just gather some wood and go and sell it. He said, this is an honorable job. It's better than sitting home and being unemployed and relying on the government, for example. Relying on some check coming from the government. So this is a very important introduction, that any type of work is honored, it's honorable, is dignified, and it's much better to do any kind of work than sitting home and rely on someone else, be it a person or a government. Now, as far as employment or employee rights, obviously wages is very important, but it's not it. In fact, there is a narration, it's from a companion of the Prophet, so he's like a disciple of the Prophet. And one time he was walking with his servant or employee, and they noticed that they were wearing the exact same clothing. And maybe in the old days that was not common. That you and your maid or servant or employee are wearing the same type of clothing. So someone stopped them and he asked, what's going on here? It doesn't look right. And the disciple said, you know, I made a mistake once in front of the Prophet. He said, I said something insulting to one of my servants. And that servant happened to be from Africa. So he called him, oh, the son of a black woman. That's the statement he made. And the Prophet was so upset. And he said, you know, you are a believer, but you have some remnants from the times of ignorance, before revelation, where people were ignorant. And this is how the ignorant people talk to each other. That you insult someone because of his mother, his color, his race, etc. Now this disciple felt so bad, and he wanted to kiss the feet of that person. But then the Prophet said, you know what you should do is, whenever you have an employee, a maid, a servant, whatever, and in those times they had slaves as well. He said, what you want to do, even though you want to keep that servant or slave, make sure that they eat from what you eat, that they dress from what you dress, that you help them if they need help, and that you don't overburden them. You don't give them a job they cannot handle. If it was, for example, if it was a weak person, you don't ask them to carry something very heavy. So you don't overburden them. And that's very important. And it's mentioned in different narrations that you don't overburden the employee. Now, the fact that also in Islam we recognize all the biblical prophets. In the Quran, for example, you find a mention of Prophet Moses many, many times. And Prophet Jesus as well. And we believe that Jesus was a prophet. So we acknowledge Jesus as a prophet, as an apostle. We believe that he did many miracles. Many of them are mentioned in the Bible. Now, one of the stories that has to do with employment actually happened to Prophet Moses. And you know, after he killed the Egyptian and he fled from the Pharaoh, he ended up in a city called Midian. Now, the Quran, in one chapter of the Quran, it talks about, you know, Moses and how he was running away from the Pharaoh, a little scared. And then he found these people around a well. And all these people were men, strong men. And they were all getting the water out. But then there was these two women who were weak and could not fight with the men. So they had to wait for everyone else to finish before they can get their water. So everybody can get their water first, and then they have to wait until the end before they can get the water. So Moses, being very strong, he took that jar, that vase, and he went and helped these women. He filled the jars with water. And he brought it back to these women. Now these women were happy. They went back to the father. And the father also was impressed. And he said, you know, we should pay Moses. And that's why I want to stop at this. I mean, Moses was not really looking for a payment. He did not think of, I'm sure he was not thinking about it. He was just trying to do a good deed. But see, this man, his honesty, he said, no, we cannot let it go like this. We have to call Moses and pay him off. So they went and called Moses, and he paid them for that job, for that time he spent helping his daughters. And then he offered him a job. And that's another reward. And he said, you know, if you want to work for me for 8 years or 10 years, it's up to you, but we're going to pay you as an employee. And also, it is mentioned in the Quran, when they made the contract, he said, وَمَا أُرِيدُ أَنْ أَشُقَّ عَلَيْكَ. I'm not going to make it hard on you. I'm not going to give you a job you cannot handle. And this is, in my opinion, is so important. As important as paying someone on time and paying them the full amount. Now, as far as that, and paying somebody on time, we have a similar tradition that says, you pay the worker before his sweat dries. So, it was kind of interesting when you mentioned that you pay before the end of the day, before sunset, because we have a very similar tradition, that even before the sweat has dried, you go ahead and pay them. We also have another tradition that says that God on the day of judgment will not speak to three people. One of them is an employer who, who hired someone to work for him, and that employee was very good. They did all the job, they got the job done, but then the employer refused to pay him his due. It's very severe when you think about it, that on the day of judgment, God will not look at you, will not care about you because of this. We think that only matters of religion or faith matter on the day of judgment. No. Dealing with your brothers and sisters in humanity is very important. It is a criteria for salvation on the day of judgment. And in Islam, it's very clear that this is the case. 2 minutes, okay. Maybe I'll end with another story from our tradition. By the way, in Islam, maybe we're infamous for being so much into what we call fiqh, which is legalities, and for every matter, not just worship. There are lots of rules and regulations, and you can study all your life about these various legal aspects. So any type of transaction, buying, selling, hiring, having an employee, a part-time employee, all of these have rules and rulings in Islam. I'm not going to discuss those here. But the reason I want to focus on the sources is because almost any Muslim scholar would have to go back to these sources. So this is where they get their legal stuff from. The final story I would like to share with you is that one time the companions were sitting with the Prophet, the disciples were sitting with the Prophet, and they noticed a man walking by, and this man was very healthy and strong and, going after something. And the companions, the disciples, were so impressed. And they started praising this man, that he's not lazy, he's going after what he wanted, and so forth. And now the Prophet said, he commented and he said, if this man is going after a job, he wants to do something in order to bring food for his children, that is for the sake of God. And if this man is seeking out sustenance and provision in order to support his elderly parents, his mother and father, then this is for the sake of God. And if this man is going out seeking provision to support himself, so he does not ask people, he doesn't have to go and beg people for money, then this is for the sake of God. And if he's walking like this out of arrogance and pride, and he has nothing in mind, then this is in the sake, or for the sake of Satan. It's for the sake of the devil.